All right, welcome. I am so excited for you today to be on this webinar with you. 3 daily actions to overcome anxiety. My name is Dr. Tye Moe, and I am someone who's really been hit by anxiety personally and studied a lot in my career. I've been in practice 12 years and really focusing on the neurology of the brain, the nervous system, and how that impacts our ability to handle stress day to day. So if you are here as a parent, you're in the right spot. You're going to get the 3 steps that we're going to share today. These tools and strategies are awesome as a parent to apply to a kiddo. And if you're here for yourself as an adult, they're going to apply to you as well. So as we get started here, I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint. Now, the reason that I'm most excited for this is that I see anxiety as something that can be a long-standing battle. For myself, there was a lot in junior high and high school that I'll share within a moment just so you have an idea where I'm coming from. But it's not something that we just all of a sudden flip this switch and it goes away. So the 3 steps that I want to share with you today is this series of things that you can do that I've done myself over and over and over again. Like I said, it doesn't all of a sudden make the anxiety go away, but it gives you tools and strategies to, on a slowly, steadily basis, start to overcome that anxiety. And basically what we're going to talk about today, what I want to share with you are not only these 3 steps, but if you're someone who's been working really hard at overcoming anxiety for yourself or your child, what are the 3 biggest mistakes that I see happening that can actually make things worse, even in moments when you think you might be helping? So just really briefly, as I said, I've been in practice for 12 years using a neurological approach to help so many families, kids and adults, get to a calmer level. So it's something that I am super passionate about because of the results that we've seen in our practice and also because of my own personal experience. Now, I was always a pretty happy-go-lucky kid growing up. I lived out in the country. You can see those logs there as my dad was building a log house that we had, and always pretty good until in 6th grade I came home one day and my mom and dad said, "You know what, Dr. Tye? You know what, Tye? We love you and your sister Dakota a lot, but not so much with each other." And they told me that they were going to get a divorce and separate. And it was a really big blow at that time for a lot of my life because I had so much stability and safety up until that point. And so we ended up moving. My mom moved an hour north, and this was a huge transition for me because not only was there the divorce, but all of a sudden I was in a new school with new kids, with no friends, not knowing anyone. And a big thing for me over the years has been the social aspect of anxiety. There's times where I just feel like sitting inside in my nice safe bubble, not wanting to venture out to meet people, even to go out to eat or go to the store. And this really stemmed from these middle school experiences. When I started a new school in 7th grade, I remember one time standing on the playground, one of those first days going out for recess, not knowing anyone, and standing all by myself, looking around, seeing all these kids playing, and I was just frightful inside, and I was so worried. What are these kids thinking of me right now as I'm standing here by myself? And the crazy thing is I was more afraid of actually going up to them and saying, "Hey, can I play with you?" I was afraid of that rejection even more than I was afraid of what they were thinking of me. So I was getting this rejection from both sides. And a couple weeks go by, and I remember once in math class, it was Mrs. Knox's math class, and she was asking the class a question. And my neighbor Dustin, neighbor in class, not outside, but sitting next to me, he raised his hand and he answers, and Mrs. Knox goes, "Oh, sorry, Dustin, that's not the correct answer. Anyone else?" And my hand shot up because I loved math, I love science, really smart in those areas. I answered correctly. Mrs. Knox goes, "Yes, Tye, you got it." And I think, okay, that's cool. I got the question. But what happened next is all of a sudden this fear response hit my body, and I thought, if I'm supposed to be making friends right now, I shouldn't be a know-it-all. I shouldn't be a show-off. And from that moment on, the rest of junior high, the rest of high school, I never raised my hand again. In fact, I really felt myself start to close in. And so, as I'm sharing these strategies with you today, know that this has been a struggle of myself, something that went through college, through chiropractic school, and even into my own practice. And I've been slowly chipping away, opening up more and more to be able to share this with you today. Now, the three strategies, I want to give the overview of what these three are, because these daily actions are going to feed off each other. And one affects the other. You can't do one without the other. And the three are, number one, getting yourself or your child into a state of calm, getting out of that fight or flight or freeze. And we're going to talk about a few strategies for that. At that point, once you're out of that fight or flight into a state of calm, that's when you can start to problem solve. We're going to actually talk about how it activates the brain in a different way, accessing a part of your brain that's more creative to solutions and problem solving. And then the third step, which as someone with anxiety can be the most difficult, is you actually then have to do something about it. You have to take a small step, a small action. And I put this in here as challenge. Initially I was thinking, well, this could be exploration, but to be honest, you are going to have to challenge yourself here. It's not just an easy thing to say, okay, all of a sudden it's gone away. So the reason I want to share with the three, as I said, is they feed off of each other, and we're going to bounce back and forth between the three to some degree, but I wanted you to have that outline. So step number one in a daily action to overcome anxiety is we have to get out of fight, flight, or freeze. And very simply, we know that when the body is full of anxiety, when there's a nervous moment, when something's overwhelming you, you go into the fight-flight response. And a lot of people have heard of fight or flight because you either have all this energy and adrenaline and anxiousness to attack something or to run away and to flight. However, the reason I wanted to make sure you understand freeze is that when the body gets so overwhelmed with stress and anxiety, there's times that we can't fight, we actually just sit there and freeze. It happens to a lot of the kiddos that we work with, is they just kind of get this panic and they don't know what to do. Now, things you might experience when that happens, obviously you might feel your heart racing, you might feel some sweat on your palms, you might look in your child and see their pupils are wide open, you might see the color on their skin change. Those might be some signs if you are a parent looking at your child wondering, are they covering it up or not? We have a little boy that just started getting adjusted in our office for anxiety, and his voice will turn to like a baby voice, and he'll start to talk like he was just a couple years old. Or he'll just start to all of a sudden get this like avoidance. He's doing the flight version. He's like, oh, I have to go look over here. Oh, I have to go look over here. I got to go check on my sister. And he'll come up with these little excuses. And at first, on the outside, it might look like he's being defiant, but really it's his fight or flight response kicking in because he's anxious and he's avoiding. Now, what's happening in the brain? We're going to talk about, very simply here, two parts of the brain. The first part is down lower, it's the amygdala. And if you've ever heard of the amygdala before, you often know in response to anxiety, this is part of your brain that's processing your environment. It's looking out to everything coming in, and it's saying, am I safe? Or is this something dangerous? And so the amygdala is this big filtering system that decides, if I'm safe, I can be calm and relaxed. If I'm in danger, I have to activate the fight or flight process. And now the thing that happens, there is a term called the amygdala hijack. So if you've heard this term before, what it is a neurological term, meaning when the amygdala senses that danger and it says, all right, based on everything that I see, let's go into fight or flight, it is actually diverting your brain's energy into a different area. And if you've ever noticed, if you're really stressed out, really anxious, maybe you don't think clearly. Or maybe as a parent, you're overly reactive. You have a shorter temper. You get home from work and your kids want to play with you and you just say, "Not now," and you react more quickly than you want to, and afterwards you apologize to your kids and you feel bad for it. But what is actually happening is this amygdala hijack is actually diverting your neurology. It is putting your body into that fight or flight, and it's taking it out of this other part you'll see on the screen there called the prefrontal cortex, that little box in orange. Because the prefrontal cortex is actually the part that allows you to have rational thought, to problem solve, and to think through things. So if you've ever felt guilty for overreacting, it's usually because your brain couldn't access your prefrontal cortex in that moment to be able to respond appropriately the way you know you want to, because you still love your kids, you still love your spouse, you want to be nice to them. But what's happening with this amygdala hijack is it's taking out that ability. So in this step one, I wanted to cover amygdala and prefrontal cortex because that's what we're going to need to do here, is to actually calm the nervous system and get back the use of the prefrontal cortex. Because when that is gone, it's impossible to really problem solve and get through one of these anxious situations that you might be experiencing. Now, what happens then is I'm going to give you 3 to 4. I've got 3 things you can do at home, and the 4th is what we do in our office. I want to cover that very briefly today, not a big emphasis of today's webinar. But the idea of all 4 of these strategies are they're actually helping your brain go from the amygdala, where it's saying fight, flight, fight, flight, fight, flight, but calming that amygdala and accessing the prefrontal cortex to make better decisions. So strategy number 1, this is actually something that my wife is an expert at. So if you're interested more in this category, her name is Samantha Moe, madglad.com is her website. Definitely check that out. And basically what happens is when we're in an emotional situation, and I'll show the study that's up there, the writing might be a little bit small for you, so I'll mention that in a moment. But basically, what this study is showing is, it was at the University of California, Los Angeles, and they showed with a functional MRI. So what that does is it measures what parts of the brain are active. And what they found is that when someone was shown emotional, basically photos of people expressing strong emotions, it is activating neurologically that amygdala. And so what happens is if you have things that trigger a lot of emotional response in your body, and especially now triggering something that makes you feel nervous or anxious, the amygdala is so active in that moment, it's going to trigger fight or flight and rob your brain of that prefrontal cortex. And the cool thing now, so what this strategy is as soon as you label the emotion, what they found with their MRI studies is it actually takes away from that amygdala and allows the prefrontal cortex to be active again. So amazing research that shows that if your child is having a meltdown, instead of trying to problem solve in that moment and say, "Oh, we can't do this here, we're in the store and everyone's looking at us," step number 1 is to label the emotion. So you look at your son or your daughter and you say, "Oh man, you're really disappointed we didn't get that treat, aren't you?" Or you might say, "Ooh, I could tell you're really angry right now." "Oh, little darling, I feel for you. You look so sad right now." And you label the emotion before you do anything else. So this is something you can do in the heat of the moment. If you have a spouse out there that's supportive of you, this is something that my wife and I, she's taught me, she's worked on this with me, but instead of trying to problem solve, as us husbands like to do, is just look at your wife and say, "Ooh, you look like you've had a tough day. You look really stressed." Whatever it is, just label that emotion and zip your lips. It's going to shift your brain from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, start to calm things down. So that's one strategy. Another strategy, obviously you've probably heard of deep breathing. So I want to share with you a couple things you can do to help make deep breathing more effective. And this is something, the labeling emotions I mentioned is oftentimes, if you're doing it proactively, let's say you're bringing your child to school, and you're driving with them and you look over and you can see they're nervous for the day, you might just say, "Oh man, you look really scared right now." And just let's see what they say, right? So that might be labeling the emotion a little bit proactively. I gave the examples of actual in a meltdown in a situation, it's more reactive. Deep breathing here is often best done proactively as well. So the two things that you can do to make it more effective, these two things actually help activate the calming part of the brain. So number one is when you or your child, or you're deep breathing with your child or by yourself, take your tongue and put it in the roof of your mouth. So you put it right behind your teeth in the roof of your mouth, and that is actually neurologically helping to get out of this amygdala and into the front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And then the second piece is to breathe out longer than you breathe in. So I have up here a breath that I like to do is called the 4-7-8 breath. And what that means is you breathe in for 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You hold for 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you breathe out for 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You do that while the tongue's at the roof of your mouth, and you can repeat it 2, 3, 4 times. But those strategies help deep breathing become more effective. So I recommend, before a stressful situation, going to school, going to work, doing that beforehand to get your body in a more grounded state. If you are needing something in the moment, you can also pull back and do that like, okay, I'm going to get through this. Let me breathe here. Add those two components to your breath. Next strategy is looking into the distance, and we're going to tie this into number 2 here shortly. This is a great way to, one, get your brain out of that stress response. What studies have found is that when you're in close quarters, you're inside, you're in a room, and you're looking only a few feet away, it actually activates that amygdala even more and activates the fear and the stress response. However, when you can look into the distance, so you're looking out over a river, over a field, over a lake, somewhere where your brain can just look far away, it actually shifts again your brain from down low up top and frees your mind to be able to problem solve better. This is a great thing to do. As I said, step 2 is where we're going to do some more problem solving. This is a great thing to do instead of doing it indoors. Go for a walk, get outside where you can look into the distance, because it's going to help your brain access that problem solving mode. And then the last piece here that I see over and over again is one of the biggest missing pieces before we go into step 2. But one of the biggest missing pieces to help calm your brain is actually when something inside your neurology is off, it can be triggering this fight or flight response as well. If you're interested in more information with this piece, definitely reach out. We're not going to spend a lot of time on today's webinar on it. But what they've shown neurologically is there's areas of the spine, especially in the upper neck, that surround the brainstem. When those areas are off, and that's an example here, you can see the scans with those red bars. That means basically those are severely off. What they do, they found neurologically now, is that actually stimulates the fight or flight response in your brain. So if you feel like you're doing so much to manage your external environment, but your brain's still getting triggered by these stress responses, a lot of times what we see on our scans is something is off in the neck area here, or down lower in the adrenal area. Either one of those can be activating the fight or flight response, and this was an example of a woman in her 20s, super anxious. She barely even could come into our office the first time. And fortunately, as we started adjusting her, she has been opening up, but she has been being able to do so many things she used to not do before because her brain is actually calmer from the inside. She's changing relationships, she got a new job, and she's coming into the office instead of scared, she's coming in bright and happy, and it is so great to see simply by doing this one part of these 3 steps that I'm going to share with you. So the ultimate goal with step number 1 is to get out of the fight or flight and into a calm mode, because that's where your brain's going to do some rational thought. And we're going to dive into step 2 here. Before we dive into step 2, and just so you know, as we're going through this, because we shared some specific different strategies and the neurology here in step 1, step 1 is going to be the longest part. The other 2 will go through more quickly. And as I said, I want to share with you with each of these steps, what are some of the biggest mistakes that I see families making over and over again. And with step 1, the biggest mistake that I see, I alluded to earlier, is trying to problem solve when you or your child's brain is still in fight or flight. Right? If you have that stressful day and your spouse comes home and he sees that stress on your face and all of a sudden he starts talking about what we can do different, it's probably not the time for that, right? Or your child's full of anxiety and you start to say, oh, it's going to be okay. You know what? Last time we did this, you went in safely and everything worked out. And you start to go into logic, it's not the time, because your brain, if it's in fight or flight response, it is so focused on the problem, it doesn't want anything to do with the solution. So that's why step 1 is so important, is to get the calm happening first. And oftentimes what we'll see is in the moment is not the time to go into step 2 or step 3 that I'm going to share with you here. Oftentimes in the moment of extreme anxiety, you just want to get through that, get to a safe space, calm down, and then go into step 2, which is to now start to create a different perspective and a different future. So I'll give you a good example here for myself, but the idea with this is that we want to look at what is the stressful situation. How do I think it's going to go? So maybe your child is afraid of their first day at school, and they're afraid because when they go into the classroom, they're not going to know anyone. Or they're afraid because when they go into the classroom, they are going to be made fun of for their clothes, or they're going to be bullied, or their teacher's going to call on them, or they're going to forget something. So you want to talk this situation over with yourself or your child and say, okay, what are you most worried about? What do you think is going to happen here? And start to put all those things on the table. And what it does is, one, it helps you actually talk about it, so it starts getting it off your chest. But then number 2 is you can start to visualize a solution around it. And it might be then like, okay, so when you go into the classroom, you're afraid that you're not going to know anyone. So maybe the solution is you get in early so you get to pick out your seat, and then you get to feel like kind of settled in. So as people are coming in that you don't know, you're already settled into the classroom. I want to share an example for myself that has worked really well. It's a little bit different than just anxiety, but it's something that, because I've done this strategy for anxiety, I've actually used it in other areas of my life. And so last year I started doing cold showers. And a cold shower actually stimulates an anxiety response the first time I did it, because it shocks my system, right? And so what I realized is the first time I did it, I would turn on the cold water a little bit cold, and it felt like my skin was burning. It'd take my breath away, and I'd panic, and I'd shut the water off right away or turn it back to hot. And so I did this a few times, and I wasn't getting very far, because as soon as that cold water hit, my body would go into fight or flight. I'd get anxious, and I'd turn the water back off. So I decided, okay, what can I do to visualize this situation? And what I did was I said, okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to be under the hot water. I'm going to turn it to cold about 4 or 5 seconds. All of a sudden, I'm going to feel this cold burst hit my skin. It's going to feel like it's burning. It's going to take my breath away. My breath is going to freeze, and I'm going to worry that this is too cold. It's probably not good for me. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my breath back. I'm going to take 3 deep breaths. I'm going to start to feel that, yes, it's cold. I don't want to be here. And I know that if I hold on to a little bit longer, I'm going to start to connect with it. I'm going to relax into it as much as I can in a cold shower. And so I painted this picture in my head. And the next time I took a cold shower, I said, okay, remember what you just role-played in your head. So I had the water hot for a while. I turned it to cold, and I said, okay, up in a few seconds it's going to hit me. and it hit me. And then I told myself, okay, what's going to happen? Well, it's going to feel like it's burning my skin and it's going to take my breath away. And sure enough, guess what happened? It felt like it was burning my skin and it took my breath away. But because my brain had processed this, I said, okay, cool. I was actually expecting this. It wasn't as surprising or as shocking as it had been in the past because I had role-played it. So now what my brain was allowed to do, instead of panicking and retreating, my brain was able to say, okay, well, since you expected this, what was the next thing we talked about? Oh, that's right, I was going to take 3 deep breaths. So I took 3 deep breaths, and I said, all right, cool, I'm still going here. And guess what? It started to get better, and I was able to get over that moment of the hump. And the reason this is so important is that for something like anxiety to exist, the reason it's called anxiety as a label is it's often that we are creating a fear response to something that we shouldn't be afraid of. And what'll happen is if you go into that fear response and you let the fear hit you, and right away you run away, or you fight or flight, or you freeze and you panic, your brain never gets a chance to access a learning moment from it. And so that's why step 2 is so important, is we're actually now getting your brain to use that prefrontal cortex. And that's, again, why we don't do step 2 in the heat of the moment. So step 1, get the brain into a calm state, and now you say, okay, I'm past whatever was the stressful situation before, so I'm going to go outside, I'm going to go for a walk with my kiddo. We're going to walk down the park where we have a good view, maybe we take some deep breaths beforehand, and while we're doing this, we're going to talk about what makes you anxious, and what might, even though it's stressful, what could we do differently? But almost expecting the anxious moment is going to prepare your child so much better. And I know as a parent, you know your child super well. As if it's for yourself, maybe you talk to your spouse, you talk to a friend, you say, hey, what could I do in this situation if you're not able to come up with an immediate solution? But now, when you process it and you role play it, maybe it's something that you have to say out loud to someone. My wife and I were just working on a situation where she had a challenging phone call to make, and she was afraid when she makes that call what's going to happen. So we actually role played, all right, this person's probably going to say this. What are you going to say? And then when they say this, what are you going to say next? And this back and forth allowed her to be prepared for it. Now, the biggest challenge here, before we go into the final step, step 3, is that when you're doing this, it can be easy to say, I just want to visualize the positive. I want to visualize, I open the door to the classroom and everyone's smiling at me, and I go and take my seat and my neighbor gives me a high five and the teacher gives me a gold star, and you only go through the positive, which is fantastic because you want to set your brain up for success. But what I see here is when you're doing this creation phase, is if you skip the negative, what can happen is when the negative comes, your brain isn't prepared for it. So when that cold water hits, if I don't acknowledge that it's going to suck for a little bit, if I don't acknowledge that it's going to take my breath away, I panic and I abort my mission. And so that's why I want you to role play. What are the stressful situations? Don't ignore them, but actually rehearse them and then visualize the positive. All right, so the last step then of these 3. So we have getting your brain into a calm state, which often involves not doing step 2 or 3 in the moment. Step number 2, identifying what the challenges are and what you could do as a solution, role playing, visualizing, getting that in your head. And now step 3. This step is so important because now you actually have to do something about it. And I read an amazing article recently that talked about, especially as parents, it can be easy to allow your child to just feel safe all the time. And I've learned this for myself over and over is, yeah, you know what? I feel safe in my home, in my room, in my living room, watching Netflix. Whatever it is, right? I feel safe here, and I don't want to challenge myself. It's scary to go out and push my boundaries. It's scary to raise my hand in class. It's scary to stand up in front of people and give a talk. And what I found is that no matter how much I did step 2 and tried to visualize a perfect scenario, visualize the challenges, until I actually stepped into the situation and did it, my brain would always have the fear in the background. And as a result, it is never going to go as deep because your brain never gets the real life experience of actually stepping outside your comfort zone and doing what you're afraid of. I know you've heard the saying, all growth comes outside the comfort zone, but this is so true with anxiety. And it doesn't mean you have to be extremely challenged and go extremely deep, but you do have to go even just that little bit. Now, I mentioned the article that I read recently, and it referenced a study at Yale done October 2016. And it was a fantastic article because what it talked about is they were comparing kids with anxiety, and they wanted to see if cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a way to help the brain think differently about a situation, how effective was that for the child versus how effective was changing your parenting approach. And the crazy thing was, I'll share what they did here in a moment, but they were actually equal. So as a parent, what they found is that you're not causing your child's anxiety, but fortunately, you can have a huge impact on helping your child get over that just by changing the way you interact with your child. And if you're an adult, it's going to also include you here. And what they found is that it's very easy to want to have your child or yourself feel safe, right? You say, oh, I see that environment, that situation makes you anxious. Let's just not do it. Instead of going to the park, we'll go watch a movie, or vice versa, whatever it is for you or your child. And what they found is that allowing this accommodation would actually increase anxiety because your child would never get the real life experience to overcome it. And that's what I want to share here is the biggest mistake that I see in this situation is you say, yep, let's just avoid it. We'll do it tomorrow. What it's doing is it's actually supporting your anxiety because your anxiety now says, oh yeah, anytime I feel scared, I just avoid. I do the flight version of fight or flight. Anytime I don't like something, I just skip it. And this is the biggest mistake because instead of supporting you or your child, it's reinforcing your anxiety. And that's what they found in this study is that you actually have to push yourself outside that comfort zone. Now, it doesn't mean you go all in and you give yourself the biggest challenge in the world because how the nervous system works is it actually works best when you can incrementally step things up. If you're afraid of heights, you don't just rush to the top of the Empire State Building and look down at the bottom. You start on a step ladder and you go up one step and you look down and you say, this is kind of scary today. That's enough for me today. The next day you say, yep, I'm going to feel a little scared when I go on that first step, but I'm going to go up 2 steps today. And you go up to that second step and you look down and you say, I'm a little scared, but not as scared as I thought. Let's try the 3rd step today. And you go up to step 3 and you feel your heart start racing and your palms start sweating and you feel your skin change and you say, I think that's enough for today. And you come back down. And each day you do a little bit more and a little bit more. But what happens is if the nervous system does too much at once, if you rush to the top of the Empire State Building and you look down and you go into a complete panic, if you've ever had a panic attack, or a complete meltdown, what it means is your nervous system got pushed so far into fight or flight, now it's actually not going to be able to learn from this. This is something that we see. A lot of kids we work with in the office have sensory issues, so they're overwhelmed by sounds, by lights, by textures, by clothes, by certain movements. And if you do too much at once, it overwhelms their system and actually creates such an intense level of fight or flight, they just freak out and they don't learn a thing from it. And now next time they want to avoid anything even close to that altogether. So as you're challenging yourself, here's the deal, is you don't have to push yourself beyond, way, way, way beyond your limits. You have to push yourself a little bit. You do want your heart beating a little bit faster. You do want to feel that stress build up in your body, because now when you go into that situation, you're going to have, as I said, step 2, to be able to say, okay, I'm going to feel this anxiousness. It's okay. It's okay. I'm going to look around. I'm going to stay present. I'm going to feel the stress in my body, but I'm also going to have a tool to go the next step. I'll share one last example as we wrap up here and summarize. So for me, a common scenario, as I said, is going into public places. And in the past, I would be, say, going into a restaurant, and I would be afraid that when I walk in, everyone's going to be looking at me. And as a result, not problem solving, not creating a new solution, I would just be worried about everyone looking at me. So what would happen is I would get in the restaurant, and I'd be looking down and trying to stay to myself and hope no one's looking at me, no one's looking at me. And the server, the waitress would take us over to our booth, and I'd get over to the booth, and I'd sit in the booth, and I'd say, whew, I'm in the booth, I'm safe now, right? And I would look at, say my wife and I are out to dinner, I'd look at my wife and be talking to her. Every once in a while I'd kind of peek out of the corner of my eye to see if anyone else, what they were doing in the restaurant, because I was safe in the booth. But as a result, I would be filled with any extreme tension and nervousness anytime I wanted to step out of that booth. Say if I had to go to the bathroom, I'd be like, okay, I've got to go to the bathroom. I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. So I'd step outside of the booth, keep my zone in, and race to the bathroom and race back. So I thought, okay, if we want to do these 3 steps, what can I do differently? And so I decided that I'm going to role play this situation. I'm going to picture myself going to the restaurant. I'm going to picture myself walking in. And now, instead of looking down, I said, okay, if everyone's looking at me, I might as well look back at them, make some eye contact, right? So I pictured myself walking into the restaurant, and instead of looking down, I'm going to survey. I'm going to just scan all the tables, all the booths, and I picture myself, people looking at me, and maybe some are smiling, maybe some are frowning, but at least I'm just going to look and I'm going to smile back. I figure I've got a nice smile. They probably can't be too judgmental of whatever they're thinking. That's kind of the story I make up in my head if I'm looking and smiling back at them. Right? So that was step 2. I pictured a new solution. And now step 3 is I'm going to walk into the restaurant, and this actually happened at Highland Grill here in St. Paul a little bit ago as I was practicing. And I walk into the restaurant, and I say, okay, I'm a little nervous here. I'm afraid of all these people judging me with their eyes, even though they weren't. And so I say, but I'm still going to look up. And I look up, and I start scanning, and I see a table here, a couple there, there's a family over there, there's a couple friends over there. I'm scanning the booths, I'm scanning the tables, and I look through the whole scene, and guess what? No one was looking at me. As I scanned this scene, I realized, wait a minute, my biggest fear of everyone staring and judging at me actually isn't happening right now, simply because I took the time to open up and assess the scene. Instead of allowing that fight or flight or freeze to overwhelm and shut me down and close me in, I actually opened back up and surveyed the scene and said, my biggest fear actually isn't true at all. So I was able to walk over to the booth, a little more upright than usual, a little more confident, more open, looking to actually try to make eye contact with people as I went on. Maybe one person looked up, sat down in the booth, and felt way more comfortable than I ever have. I actually had to go to the bathroom, and I said, well, I can easily go to the bathroom now because when I walked in, no one was looking at me, so no one's going to be looking at me now. So sure enough, I get out of the booth to go to the bathroom, scan around. Everyone's in their own world. They're having their own meal. Maybe they're just afraid as I was. And I go to the bathroom, I come back, and it was a way different experience, simply because I was able to apply these 3 steps and challenge myself to get out of my comfort zone even just that little bit. And now I've grown from it. So now when I go into a restaurant, a store, whatever it is, I can lead with that openness, knowing that everything is going to be all right. So as we wrap up here today, I want you to know that there are so many resources out there for you. Please keep these 3 steps in mind for yourself, or your child. If you're looking for more information, check out our website, check out our Facebook page. We do lots of tips and strategies like this on a regular basis. We share stories of so many practice members that we've worked with who have been able to overcome anxiety to an extreme level. And just know that we are here for you. This is a picture of our team here at Whole Family Chiropractic. We've got a great team of people who love to take care of people like yourself, kids and adults with stress and anxiety, and really help you lead and live that life that you want to live. So I'm super thankful that I was able to be with you during this webinar and excited for your future. As I said, reach out, email, call, shoot us a message here on Facebook, and I will talk to you guys soon. Take care.